Hello? Is anyone there?
A black cleaner's toddler wandered into a cold Korean Mafia boss's office at 11:47 p.m. And by the time the elevator doors opened again, 3 armed men had their guns drawn on a 2-year-old girl in a unicorn onesie. Before we go any further, if stories like this keep you up past your bedtime scrolling for just one more, hit subscribe right now, because this one is going to wreck you in the best way. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and smash that like button before we start, because trust me, you're going to want to talk about this ending. Okay, let's get into it. The 42nd floor of the Cho Tower was supposed to be empty at midnight. That was the rule. That was always the rule. Cleaning staff worked the lower floors between 9 and 11. The executive floor, floor 42, the floor with the black marble and the bulletproof glass, and the office that belonged to a man most of Seoul's underworld referred to only as Boss Cho. That floor was cleaned separately by a 2-person team, under camera supervision, between 11 and midnight, and never, ever after. Amara Johnson had worked that floor for 6 months. She knew the rule better than anyone. Which is exactly why her stomach dropped through the floor when she turned around at 11:44 p.m., mop in hand, to find the playpen behind the reception desk empty. Nia. Her voice cracked on the second syllable. She said it again, louder, spinning in a slow circle in the dim blue light of the executive lobby. Nia, baby, where are you? Nothing. Just the hum of the building's climate control and the distant tick of an elevator somewhere in the shaft. Amara's supervisor had told her twice that she couldn't bring her daughter to work, that the daycare on 5th had a night program, that there were rules, that Cho Tower didn't do exceptions. But the night program cost more than Amara made in 2 shifts, and her mother, who used to watch Nia, had a stroke in March that took half her right side and most of her balance, and there was no one else. No one. So for 6 months, Amara had been sneaking a portable playpen into the janitor's closet on the ground floor and praying nobody with a badge above hers ever found out. Tonight, for the first time, she'd let herself relax for exactly 4 minutes to finish the executive lobby floor. 4 minutes. Now the playpen was empty and the door to the executive floor, the one door in this entire building that was never supposed to be unlocked past 11, was standing open a crack, throwing a blade of light into the dark hallway. Amara didn't think. She ran. 2 floors up, in an office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Han River, a man named Cho Jinho was staring at a ledger that didn't balance, and he did not like things that didn't balance. Jinho was 39 years old. He had inherited an organization at 26 from a father who died with a knife between his ribs, and in 13 years he had never once let anyone see him flinch. His men called him cold behind his back, sometimes to his face, when they were drunk enough to be stupid, and he had never bothered correcting them because cold kept people alive. Cold kept him alive. He heard the door before he heard anything else. A soft click, then the whisper of small sneakers on marble. He looked up, already reaching for the drawer where he kept a gun he rarely needed to use, and stopped with his hand frozen mid-motion. A toddler stood in the doorway of his office. 2 years old, maybe, dark curly hair in 2 uneven puffs, a unicorn onesie with a torn strap. She was staring at him with the particular fearless curiosity that only very small children and very stupid men possess, and then she smiled a huge, gap-toothed, completely unguarded smile, and said one word. Hi. Jinho did not move. In 13 years, no one had walked into this office uninvited and lived long enough to regret it. And now a child was toddling across his marble floor directly toward him, arms already lifting like she expected to be picked up. Stop, he said, and his voice came out sharper than he meant it to. She didn't stop. She had no idea what stop meant in the register he just used it in, the register that made grown men go pale. She kept coming, one hand reaching for the leg of his desk to steady herself, and reached his chair, and looked up at him with an expression of pure, unbothered expectation. Up, she said. Jinho stared down at her, the way a man might stare at a bomb that had, against every law of physics, failed to go off. That was the exact moment the office door slammed open again, and a woman's voice, raw with terror, cut through the room like a blade. "N.I.A." Amara froze in the doorway. Her daughter was standing beside the desk of the most dangerous man in the building, in the district, in half the city, if the rumors were true, with one small hand fisted in the fabric of his suit trousers, looking up at him like he was furniture she'd decided to climb. Every terrible headline Amara had ever half-read about men like this flashed behind her eyes in half a second. Bodies in the harbor, a councilman who disappeared, a rival's restaurant that burned down with the rival still inside. "I am so sorry," she said, and her voice shook so badly the words barely held together. She crossed the room fast, scooping Nia up before the man could so much as blink, pulling her daughter's face against her shoulder like she could physically shield her from whatever came next. "She got out of the playpen, I swear. I only turned around for a second. I am so sorry, please." "Whose child is this?" His voice was flat, not loud. Somehow that was worse. "Mine," Amara said. I clean this floor. I know I'm not supposed to have her here, I know, please. I'll take her and go. It won't happen again, I swear on everything." "You brought a child into this building." It wasn't a question. Amara felt her whole body go cold, because she knew every cleaner who'd worked this building longer than a month knew what happened to people who broke rules on floor 42. She'd heard the stories in the break room. A guy named Sukwon who'd taken photos of the wrong hallway and never showed up for his next shift. Nobody talked about where he went. Nobody asked. "Please," Amara said again, and hated how small her voice sounded. "I need this job. I have nobody else to watch her. Please don't." She stopped herself before she said "fire me," because some instinct, old, animal, the kind that had kept her alive through worse nights than this one, told her that firing might not be the worst outcome on the table tonight. Nia, oblivious to all of it, twisted in her mother's arms and reached one small hand back toward Jinho. "Bye-bye," she said cheerfully and waved. For one full second, nothing in the room moved. Not Amara, who was bracing for a threat. Not the two security men who had just appeared in the doorway behind her, hands already inside their jackets. Not Jinho. And then something happened on Jinho's face that none of the three adults in the room, not Amara, not either guard, had ever personally witnessed before, in years of working near him. He almost smiled. It was gone half a second later, replaced by the same flat, unreadable expression he wore to board meetings and to executions, but Amara had seen it. A crack. Small, there and gone, but there. "Leave the child's toys out of my sight next time," he said finally, and his tone had shifted by some fraction Amara couldn't name. Not warm, nothing close to warm, but no longer the register that made her knees threaten to give out. "You have 30 seconds to get her off this floor." Amara didn't need to be told twice. She was already moving, already murmuring apologies into her daughter's hair, already calculating in the back of her mind how she was going to explain this to her supervisor tomorrow, how she was going to survive this job long enough to make rent, when Nia, because 2-year-olds have absolutely no self-preservation instinct and no concept of the word danger, twisted around one more time in her mother's arms and shouted, delighted, into the marble silence of the most feared office in the district. "Bye, Mr. Grumpy." Behind Amara, one of the guards made a sound that might have been a badly disguised laugh and immediately turned it into a cough. Jinho said nothing at all. But as the elevator doors closed on Amara and her daughter 30 seconds later, he was still standing exactly where they'd left him, staring at the space where the child had been, with an expression his own men who had known him for over a decade, would not have recognized on his face. Amara didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her bed in the one-bedroom apartment she shared with her daughter and her mother's old recliner, replaying every second of it. Waiting for a phone call telling her not to come back, waiting for something worse than that. It never came. At 8:47 the next morning, her supervisor called. Amara's stomach dropped so fast she nearly missed the words. "You're being moved," her supervisor said, sounding baffled. "Effective tonight, floor 42, night shift, solo assignment 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. Pays better. I don't know why, but it came from upstairs, way upstairs. Amara sat frozen on the edge of her bed for a long moment after the call ended, Nia babbling to a stuffed rabbit on the floor beside her. She should have felt relieved. She'd expected to be fired, and instead she'd been promoted, a raise, in the middle of the worst night of her working life. Instead, all she felt was a slow, cold certainty settling into her chest. Men like Cho Jin-ho did not do anything without a reason, and she had absolutely no idea what his reason was. 3 weeks passed, and floor 42 became, against every instinct Amara had, almost normal. Almost. She never saw him those first 10 nights. She'd come in at 10, clean and careful, silent efficiency, and leave by 2, and the office at the end of the hall stayed dark and empty the entire time, the way it was supposed to. She told herself that was the end of it, a strange, tense encounter, an unexpected promotion, and now back to invisible, which was exactly how she liked her relationship with dangerous men who ran towers full of armed guards. Then, on the 11th night, she found a small stuffed rabbit sitting on the reception desk. Identical, impossibly, to the one Nia had left in the janitor's closet downstairs weeks ago and cried over for 2 straight days after Amara couldn't find it. She picked it up, turned it over in her hands, checked the tag. Same brand. Not the same rabbit, this one still had its store tag attached, but close enough that her hands went cold holding it. She left it on the desk. She wasn't taking gifts from a man who ran a criminal empire out of a glass tower. She told herself that very firmly, all the way home. The next night it was gone. In its place, a small folded note, in handwriting so precise it looked typed. For the child, no conditions. Amara stared at that note for a full minute under the lobby's blue night light before she folded it into her pocket. And against every survival instinct she had cultivated over 28 years of being poor and black and alone in cities that didn't care whether she made it home, took the rabbit with her. It became a pattern she didn't ask for and couldn't stop. A children's book left on the reception desk with a note that said saw this and thought of the rabbit. A schedule change that somehow always aligned with Nia's daycare pickup times, though Amara had never told anyone at work about her daycare schedule. A day, 3 weeks in, when her mother's physical therapy copay bounced, and Amara got a call from the clinic saying the balance had already been cleared. No name attached, no explanation. And when she called her supervisor in a panic asking who authorized it, the woman on the other end of the line went quiet in a way that told Amara everything and nothing at once. She confronted him about it on a Tuesday night in late September, catching him for the first time in 3 weeks actually in his office. Door open, lights on, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow over forearms that looked like they belonged to a much rougher line of work than international shipping, which was the story on the building directory. "I need you to stop," Amara said from the doorway before she could lose her nerve. Jin-ho looked up from a laptop screen. If he was surprised she'd spoken to him unprompted, he didn't show it. "Stop what?" "The rabbit, the book, my mother's copay." Her voice was steady, which surprised even her. "I don't know what you want, but I won't owe you anything. Not for my daughter, not for my mother, not for anything." Something flickered across his face. Not anger, which she'd braced for, but something closer to genuine confusion. "I don't want anything," he said. "Men like you always want something." "Men like me?" He set the laptop down slowly, folding his hands on the desk in front of him, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked directly at her, not through her, not past her, the way powerful men usually looked at women who cleaned their floors, but at her. "You've decided who I am." "I know who you are. Everyone in this building knows who you are." "Then you know, I don't do anything without reason." "Right, so what's the reason?" For a long moment, he didn't answer. The silence stretched long enough that Amara almost turned to leave, embarrassed at having pushed a man who could, with one phone call, make her disappear as easily as the rumored suck one had. "She said one word to me," he said finally, quietly, like it cost him something to say it out loud. "Hi," and then she asked to be picked up. No one has asked me for anything in this office in 13 years without wanting something enormous in return. She wanted to be held. Amara said nothing. Her chest had gone tight in a way she didn't want to examine too closely. I don't know what to do with that, Jinho continued, and his voice had dropped into something almost raw, almost human, a register she suspected very few people alive had ever heard from him. I have spent 13 years making sure nothing gets close enough to me to be used against me, and your daughter walked directly at me and asked to be picked up, and I. He stopped himself, recomposed. The mask went back up so fast Amora might have imagined the crack in it if she hadn't been staring directly at his face when it happened. The rabbit was not a transaction, he said, flat again, controlled again. Take it or don't. Your mother's medical bill will not be undone regardless of what you decide. Good night, Ms. Johnson. He went back to his laptop. Conversation over. Dismissed, the way she imagined everyone in this building got dismissed when he decided a matter was closed. Amara stood in the doorway a moment longer than she needed to, turning something over in her chest that she didn't have a name for yet, and then she left without another word. But she took the note home with her that night, and the next one, and the one after that. If you've made it this far, you already know this story's about to take a turn, so don't miss it. Hit that subscribe button now, because part of what happens next involves a name from Jinho's past that changes absolutely everything, and I promise you don't want to come into that scene as a stranger to this channel. All right, back to the tower. It was a man named Deacon who first noticed the change. Deacon had been Jinho's second-in-command for 11 years, the man who handled logistics, who kept the ledgers, who had buried 3 of Jinho's enemies with his own hands and never lost a night of sleep over any of them. He was not a man given to sentiment, and it was precisely because of that, and not despite it, that he was the first person in the organization to notice something in his boss had shifted. It was small things at first. Jinho leaving the office before midnight for the first time in years. A schedule adjustment that gave the night cleaning crew easier hours. A refusal, quiet, absolute, and entirely uncharacteristic, to authorize a hit on a rival's supply warehouse because it sat 2 blocks from an elementary school. Since when do we care about schools? One of the younger men, Ti-Yong, had muttered in a meeting, not quite quietly enough. Jinho hadn't answered. He'd simply looked at Ti-Yong until the younger man found something urgent to study on the table in front of him, and the meeting moved on. But Deacon noticed. Deacon always noticed. He brought it to Jinho directly, 3 weeks after the rabbit, in the private elevator that ran between the executive floor and the underground garage. The one place in the building neither of them had ever needed to worry about being overheard. There's a woman on the night crew, Deacon said, watching the floor numbers descend. Cleaner, single mother. You had her reassigned to this floor personally. I'm aware of who works my building, Deacon. Word's starting to move. Not far yet, but it's moving. Deacon kept his eyes forward, professional, careful. The Choi family's been looking for a weakness in our organization for 2 years and finding nothing because you've never given them one. A woman and a child on your floor getting special treatment, that's not nothing anymore. That's a lever, and levers get pulled. Jinho's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. She's a cleaner. She knows nothing about our operations. Doesn't matter what she knows. Matters what they think you'll trade to keep her safe. The elevator reached the garage level and the doors slid open, but neither man moved. Cut it off, Deacon said, quiet, direct, the way only a man who'd earned the right to speak plainly to Cho Jinho could say it. Whatever this is, end it clean now before the Choi family decides to test the theory themselves. I've kept you alive for 11 years by making sure you never had anything worth taking from you. Don't hand them something now. Jinho stepped out of the elevator without answering, and Deacon watched him go, and neither of them said the thing they both understood to be true, that the warning had come 3 weeks too late, because whatever this was, it had already stopped being something Jinho could simply cut off. 2 nights later, Amara noticed the car. It was parked across the street from her apartment building when she walked home from the bus stop at 2:20 a.m., Nia asleep against her shoulder, the way she'd carried her home almost every night for 6 months. A black sedan, engine idling, windows tinted dark enough that she couldn't see inside. It wasn't there the next night. It was there the night after that. On the third night, it followed her, slow, deliberate, keeping exactly 1 block behind her the entire 6-minute walk from the bus stop to her building. And when she finally got inside and locked the door and checked twice that the chain was latched, her hands were shaking so badly she had to set Nia down on the couch instead of carrying her to bed. She didn't call the police. Some instinct, sharpened by 6 months of working in that tower, told her the police weren't the right call for whatever this was. Instead, at 3:47 a.m., with her daughter finally asleep and her own heart still hammering, Amara did something she'd sworn to herself she'd never do. She called the number Jinho had left on the back of one of his notes, a number she'd told herself, every single time she looked at it, that she would never use. He picked up on the second ring, not groggy, not surprised, like he'd been awake, waiting for exactly this call for exactly this hour. "Someone's watching my building," Amara said, and her voice cracked on the last word despite every effort to keep it steady. "A car, 3 nights now. It followed me tonight." There was a silence on the other end of the line, brief but absolute. And when Jinho spoke again, his voice had dropped into a register Amara hadn't heard from him before, low, controlled, and underneath the control, something that sounded almost like fear. "Don't leave your apartment," he said. "Don't open the door for anyone. I'm sending men to your building right now." "Jinho, what is going on?" "I need you to listen to me very carefully," he said, and the urgency in his voice made every hair on her arms stand up. "This is not about you. This is about me, and it has followed you home, and I am so sorry, and I need you to trust me for the next 10 minutes even though you have no reason to. Can you do that?" Amara looked over at her daughter, curled small and unaware on the couch, and felt something in her chest go hard and certain. 10 minutes, she said. Then you tell me everything." She hung up the phone, and in the silence of her apartment, with the black sedan still idling somewhere outside on the street below, she realized her hands had stopped shaking. Somewhere between the first ring and the last word he'd said, they'd stopped shaking, and she didn't know yet whether that was relief or something far more dangerous. He kept his word. 6 minutes later, Amara counted every second of it standing at her window with the lights off, watching the street. 2 black SUVs pulled up on either side of the sedan, boxing it in, and 4 men in dark suits stepped out with a calm, practiced menace that told her everything she needed to know about what kind of men worked for Cho Jinho. The sedan's engine cut off. A window rolled down. Words were exchanged that Amara couldn't hear from 3 floors up, and then the sedan pulled away, slow and unhurried, and one of Jinho's men looked directly up at her window and gave a small nod, like he knew exactly where she was standing and wanted her to see that the threat had gone. Jinho arrived himself 20 minutes later. Amara opened the door before he could knock, because she'd been standing behind it, arms crossed, adrenaline finally starting to curdle into something closer to fury. "Talk," she said. "Now everything." He stood in her doorway, this man who owned a 42-floor tower, who commanded fear from grown men twice his size, who had never, in the 6 months she'd known of him, looked anything less than completely in control, and for the first time he looked tired. Genuinely, humanly tired. "May I come in?" "No, talk here." He accepted that without argument, which told her more than any explanation could have. "There's another organization," he said quietly. "The Choi family. We've been in a cold war with them for 2 years, no open conflict, but constant pressure, constant probing for weaknesses. 2 weeks ago, one of my men warned me that word was spreading about you. About the way I've been," he stopped, searched for the word, seemed to find it distasteful and attentive, "to you and your daughter. So they're threatening us to get to you." "Yes." "Because you were sending me rabbits." "Yes." Amara felt something crack open in her chest, not fear this time, but something closer to rage. "You put a target on my daughter's back because you couldn't stop leaving me notes." "I know." His voice didn't rise, didn't defend itself. "I know exactly what I did. I told myself for 3 weeks that it was harmless. That I could keep you both safe without anyone noticing. I was wrong, and now there are men outside your building because of a mistake I made, and I am not going to pretend that isn't entirely my fault. The honesty of it, the total absence of excuse, took the wind out of her anger faster than any apology could have. "What happens now?" she asked, quieter. "Now I fix it." His jaw was set hard, the mask from the office fully back in place, except this time Amara understood what was underneath it. "I'm moving you and your daughter somewhere secure until this is resolved. Guards, 24 hours. And I'm going to make it very clear to the Choi family that this line, you, her, is not one they get to cross. And if they don't listen." Jin-ho met her eyes, and for one terrible, honest second, she saw exactly what kind of man he'd had to become to survive 13 years running an empire built on fear. "Then I remind them why everyone still calls me cold," he said. "And I promise you, Amara, whatever it costs me, it will not cost you or her anything at all." It was the first time he'd ever used her first name. Neither of them mentioned it, but it sat between them in the doorway, heavier than anything else that had been said that night. If your stomach just dropped the way mine did writing this part, that's exactly the kind of story we tell on this channel every single week. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what happens when the Choi family decides not to back down. And drop a comment right now. Do you think Jin-ho can actually protect them, or is he about to lose everything trying? I'll be reading your predictions. Let's keep going. The safe house was a 2-bedroom apartment on the 11th floor of a building Amara had never heard of, in a neighborhood she didn't recognize, with 2 guards stationed in the hallway around the clock, and a third in an unmarked car outside. Her mother was moved there too, on Jin-ho's insistence, along with a home health aide he'd arranged and paid for without being asked. "So you don't have to choose between watching her and watching your daughter," he'd said, and Amara hadn't had the energy left to argue. For 4 days, nothing happened. Amara went to work, because Jin-ho had insisted the routine stay as normal as possible, that any sudden change would tell the Choi family they'd rattled him, and came home to a daughter who thought the extra friends in the hallway were the most exciting development of her short life, and a mother who kept giving Amara long, searching looks that Amara pretended not to notice. On the 5th night, Jin-ho came to the safe house himself, later than usual, and Amara opened the door to find him standing there not in one of his tailored suits, but in a plain black jacket, looking, for the first time since she'd met him, almost young. "They've agreed to a meeting," he said without preamble. "Neutral ground tomorrow night. The Choi family wants to negotiate." "Negotiate what?" "Terms, what it will cost them to leave you and your daughter alone permanently." His expression was carefully blank, but something underneath it was tight, controlled, coiled. "I don't expect it to be simple." "What does not simple mean?" "It means the Choi family doesn't want peace. They want leverage. And they've realized I'll pay almost anything to keep the 2 of you safe, which means tomorrow's meeting is either the end of this, or..." He stopped. "Or what?" "Or it's a trap," he said finally, quietly, "designed to draw me out somewhere they can control, using the 2 of you as the reason I walk into it." Amara felt the floor tilt slightly under her feet. "Then don't go." "If I don't go, they escalate. They'll assume I'm weak, and weak men in my position don't stay alive, and neither does anyone standing near them." His eyes met hers, steady despite everything he'd just said. "I have to go, Amara, but I promise you I'm not walking into anything blind. I've spent 13 years surviving men exactly like this. You promised me nothing would happen to us, not that nothing would happen to you." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise. She realized, genuine surprise, like it hadn't occurred to him that she might be afraid for him too. "I didn't think that mattered to you," he said quietly. Amara opened her mouth to say something sharp, something that would put distance back between them, the way she'd been trying to keep distance between them for 6 months. Instead, what came out was smaller and far more honest than she intended. "It matters," she said. "I don't know when it started mattering, but it does." For a long moment, neither of them said anything else. The hallway outside was quiet except for the low murmur of the guards, and inside the apartment, Nia's cartoons played faintly through the wall, and somewhere between the two of them, 6 months of careful distance collapsed into something neither of them had planned for and neither of them, in that moment, tried to pull back from. Jinho reached out, slow, like he expected her to stop him, and tucked a loose braid behind her ear. "Tomorrow night," he said quietly, "I am going to end this, permanently. And when it's done, I am going to come back here and finish this conversation properly. I need you to trust that. And if you don't come back..." His hand lingered against her cheek a moment longer. "Then Deacon has instructions to make sure you and your daughter are protected for the rest of your lives, regardless of what happens to me." He said it simply, without drama, the way a man says something he's already made peace with. "But I intend to come back, Amara. I have something to come back for now. I haven't had that in a very long time." He left before she could answer. She stood in the doorway long after he was gone, her hand still touching the place his fingers had been, and for the first time in 6 months of careful, guarded distance, Amara let herself admit, quietly, privately, terrifyingly, that she was no longer just afraid of Cho Jinho. She was afraid of losing him. The meeting was set for an abandoned shipping warehouse on the industrial edge of the harbor, neutral ground by underworld tradition, the kind of place where old grudges got settled and old debts got paid, one way or another. Jinho arrived with 6 men. The Choi family's representative, a narrow-faced man named Choi Di-sung, arrived with 8, and the imbalance was intentional, a message before a single word had been spoken. "Cho Jinho," Di-sung said, spreading his hands in mock welcome. "Thank you for coming. I confess, I wasn't certain you would. Rumor has it you've gotten sentimental lately." "Say what you came to say." "Direct, I respect that." Di-sung's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Here are our terms. You cede the harbor's shipping routes, all of them, not the northern half we've been fighting over for 2 years, all of them. And in exchange, we forget we ever knew the name of the cleaner on your 42nd floor, or the fact that she has a daughter, or which building she's currently hiding in with your guards standing in the hallway." Jinho's face didn't change. Inside, something did. "The harbor routes are worth more than the woman is worth to me," he said flatly. "You know this. You're testing whether I'll pay an unreasonable price for something sentimental, and the answer is no." Di-sung's smile flickered just slightly, a crack in the performance. "Careful, Jinho. My men followed her for 3 nights. We know the school her mother's physical therapist works out of. We know the daycare. We know." "You know nothing you'll live to use," Jinho said, and his voice had gone very quiet, very still, the register that made men twice his size go pale, the register Amara had heard exactly once, on the night they met. "You wanted a demonstration that I'll trade something valuable to protect what's mine. Here it is. I will burn every route, every warehouse, every ship your family has ever touched to the waterline before I let anyone lay a hand on that child. That was never a negotiation, Di-sung. That was a warning, and you mistook it for weakness." For a long, dangerous moment, nobody in the warehouse moved. Then Di-sung laughed, short, humorless, and gave a small signal with 2 fingers that Jinho recognized half a second before 8 men reached simultaneously for 8 concealed weapons. "Then I suppose," Di-sung said, "we do this the hard way." The gunfire that followed lasted less than 90 seconds, though to the men inside that warehouse it felt considerably longer. Jinho's men had come prepared for exactly this outcome. He'd told Deacon 3 days earlier that he doubted the Choi family intended a peaceful resolution, and Deacon, ever thorough, had positioned 2 additional men on the warehouse's upper catwalks before the meeting ever began. When it was over, 3 of Di-sung's men were down. 2 of Jinho's. Di-sung himself stood with a gun leveled directly at Jinho's chest, breathing hard, blood running from a graze along his temple, and Jinho stood with a gun leveled directly back, neither man willing to be the first to lower his weapon. "You'll never make it out of this warehouse," Di-sung said, voice ragged. "Neither will you," Jinho said. "So the only question left is whether you die knowing your family's roots get handed to whoever's left standing, or whether you walk away right now and we call this finished." Di-sung's hand shook, just slightly, around the grip of his weapon. "This isn't over," he said finally, low, furious. "You've made an enemy for life, Cho Jinho, over a cleaner and her brat. Then make it, Jinho said. But you touch her or her daughter or anyone connected to either of them ever again, and I will not stop at your organization. I will end your bloodline. That is not a threat, Di-sung. That is the last mercy you're going to get from me. Di-sung lowered his weapon first. He and his surviving men backed out of the warehouse into the dark, and it wasn't until the sound of their vehicles had faded completely into the night that Jinho finally let his own weapon drop to his side. And one of his men, Ti-yong, blood staining his sleeve from a wound he hadn't mentioned, stepped up beside him. "Boss, you're bleeding." Jinho looked down, almost surprised to find it was true. A graze along his ribs he hadn't felt land in the chaos of the last 90 seconds. "Get everyone out," he said, "now before they change their minds." The call came to Amara's phone at 1:14 a.m. Not from Jinho. From Deacon, his voice tight and controlled in a way that told Amara something was wrong before he'd said a single word. "There's been an incident," Deacon said. "Jinho is alive. I need you to hear that first before anything else. He is alive. But he's been shot and he's asking for you, and I'm sending a car right now." Amara didn't remember deciding to move. One moment she was standing frozen in the safe house kitchen with the phone against her ear, and the next she was pulling on her coat with shaking hands while her mother, propped up on the couch, was already reaching for Nia, murmuring, "Go, baby, go, I've got her, go." In the steady, unshakable voice Amara hadn't heard from her since before the stroke. The car arrived 4 minutes later. Amara didn't remember the drive at all. If you're feeling that ache in your chest right now, that's exactly the reaction I was hoping for, and I promise this story has a real ending waiting for you, not a cliffhanger that leaves you hanging forever. But you'll only catch it if you're subscribed, because we're getting close to the part where everything either falls apart completely or comes together for good. Comment below right now with one word for how you think this ends. I want to see your predictions before we get there. All right. Let's find out what happened in that warehouse. The private medical suite Jinho's organization kept for exactly this kind of emergency was on the 3rd floor of a nondescript building 2 blocks from Cho Tower. No hospital records, no questions. A doctor who'd been on retainer for over a decade and had seen far worse wounds than the one currently being stitched closed along Jinho's ribs. Amara arrived to find him sitting upright on the exam table, jacket gone, shirt cut away. A doctor working with quick, practiced hands, while Deacon stood in the corner looking like a man who'd aged 5 years in one night. "He's stable," Deacon said quietly, before Amara could ask. "The bullet grazed him, 2 inches to the left, and we wouldn't be having this conversation." Jinho looked up when she walked in, and something in his face, exhausted, in pain, guarded down to nothing, made Amara cross the room without a single word and take his hand before she'd even fully process the decision to do it. "You said you'd come back," she said, voice unsteady. "You didn't say you'd come back like this." "I'm here," he said quietly. "That was the promise." "Barely. Barely still counts." The doctor finished the last stitch and stepped back, giving them what little privacy the small room allowed, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. Just the sound of Amara's shaking breath and Jinho's hand tightening around hers, careful, deliberate, like he was reminding himself he was allowed to hold onto something now. "It's over," he said finally. "The Choi family backed down. They won't come near you or near again. I made certain of that tonight, in terms they understood completely." "At what cost?" "A few stitches." A faint, exhausted almost smile. "Cheaper than I expected, honestly." "Don't joke. You could have died." "I know." His voice softened, dropped the careful control he wore like armor everywhere else, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked at her without a single wall left standing. "I have spent 13 years making certain nothing in my life was worth dying for, because worth dying for meant worth using against me. Tonight, for the first time, something was. I'm not sorry it was you." Amara felt something break open in her chest, grief and relief, and something warmer than either, tangled together so tightly she couldn't separate them. "I was so scared," she admitted, quiet raw. "Not for me, for you. I didn't understand how much that had changed until Deacon called. I know the feeling, Jinho said. I've had it every single night since a 2-year-old walked into my office and asked to be picked up. Despite everything, the blood, the fear, the 4 hours of not knowing whether he was alive, Amara found herself laughing, wet and unsteady, and Jinho, watching her, let himself smile fully for what might have been the first time in over a decade. Mr. Grumpy, she said softly, I've been called worse. Not by anyone who mattered enough for you to remember it, though, have you? He didn't answer that. He didn't need to. The answer was written plainly enough on his face, in the way he was still holding her hand, like letting go of it might undo something he'd fought too hard to keep. 6 weeks later, Cho Jinho stood in his office at 9:15 in the evening. No longer midnight. No longer the hour he used to wait until the entire building was empty before he let himself feel anything at all, and watched a 2-year-old in a slightly too big unicorn onesie march directly across his marble floor toward his desk like she owned the place. Up, Nia announced, arms lifted, absolutely certain of her welcome. Jinho set down the report he'd been reading and picked her up without a second's hesitation, settling her onto his hip with the practiced ease of 6 weeks' worth of practice. And she immediately reached for the pen on his desk, with the single-minded focus of a toddler who had discovered that pens were, in fact, the single greatest invention in human history. No, he said, moving it out of reach, and she pouted at him with an expression so exactly like her mother's that he nearly laughed out loud. Amara appeared in the doorway a moment later, no longer in a cleaning uniform. She'd been promoted twice since that first night, first to shift supervisor, and then, 3 weeks ago, into a position in the building's administration that Jinho had absolutely nothing to do with arranging. He'd insisted, though Deacon's expression whenever the subject came up suggested otherwise. There you are, she said, and the warmth in her voice when she looked at the two of them, the cold, feared boss of half the district's underworld, currently negotiating with a toddler over pen custody, had nothing careful or guarded left in it at all. I've been looking everywhere. She let herself in, Jinho said. I've stopped locking that door. You've stopped locking a lot of things, Amara said, crossing the room to lean against his desk, close enough that her shoulder brushed his arm, a closeness that would have been unthinkable to either of them 7 months ago and now felt like the most natural thing in the world. Some things are worth the risk, he said quietly, and it wasn't about the door at all, and they both knew it. Nia, entirely uninterested in the moment passing between the two adults, finally gave up on the pen and instead grabbed a fistful of Jinho's tie, tugging it with the same fearless, unbothered confidence she'd walked into this office with on the very first night. The night that had, against every rule Jinho had built his entire life around, changed absolutely everything. He looked down at her, and then at Amara, and understood, with a clarity he'd never expected to feel again after the life he'd lived and the things he'd done to survive it, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Outside the windows, the city glittered on, indifferent and vast, full of danger and deals and men who still called him cold behind his back. Let them. He knew better now. And so, watching her daughter tug his tie with one small, determined fist while her mother leaned into his side like she belonged there, did Amara. Nothing was ever the same again. And for the first time in 13 years, that was exactly what Cho Jinho wanted. And that's the story. If this one hit you right in the chest, you know exactly what to do. Hit subscribe so you never miss the next one. Drop a comment telling me your favorite moment. Mine's the pen negotiation, no contest. And give this video a like if you want more stories exactly like this. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves.